All right, today we're going to work in our Catholic Saint coloring book again. But before we do that, actually, let me tell you who we're going to do today. We are going to work on Saint Elizabeth of Hungary. It says Hungary is the name of the country. Isn't that funny? Where she lives, it's called Hungary. Saint Elizabeth of Hungary married a young prince. Every day she would take extra food and clothing from the castle and give it to the poor. Others told her husband what she was doing, and he supported her generous giving. But her husband's mother, the queen, did not like that she was helping the poor. So we're going to read a story about her. It's called Roses in the Snow, and it's about a miracle that happens with Saint Elizabeth. One of my favorite stories. So a grandmother is going to be telling the story to her granddaughter. Her name's Elizabeth, too. Elizabeth loved roses, yellow ones with the color of the hot summer Hungarian sun, red ones like the embroidery on her grandmother's dress, white ones like the storks on the top of the village church. She loved them all. She loved how her grandmother grew them in the windowsill, especially for her. Grandma had planted them in large pots the day Elizabeth was born, and every year in November, they picked some and took them to the village church. Today was that day. Grandmother, tell me the story about the roses and the beautiful lady. Tell me about my Elizabeth. Grandmother's wrinkles around her mouth stretched into a sweet smile. She wobbled to her rocking chair and sat down by the stove, fixing her babushka, which is her scarf, tight around her gray hair. She looked at her sweet Elizabeth and she began to tell the story, a story so sweet and so familiar, yet always so exciting and so new. A long time ago, began Grandmother, so now's the story of Saint Elizabeth. And even the playful flames in the fire quieted down, and the fluffy cat stretched blissfully on the rug near her. A long time ago, in this very beautiful country of ours, during the hot July days when the farmers gathered sweet hay for the winter, a little girl was born. As beautiful as the Hungarian roses and as sweet as the Hungarian bread, she was her parents' joy. They named her Elizabeth. The child grew happy and virtuous in the king's court. She loved to spend her days playing in the flower garden and marveling at her favorite flowers, the sweet, fragrant roses. She would gather them in her skirts and carry them to the church to grace the feet of the Blessed Mother Mary. So roses are her favorite flower. As it happens, times fly on the wings of the storks, and one spring followed another, and the girl grew into a beautiful maiden. Her outward beauty was great, but the beauty of her soul was deeper, and the perfume of her holiness was sensed everywhere. One day, as it happens to many a maiden, she married. She married a good man by the name of Ludwig. The couple happily set forth in their life together. The king loved his sweet Hungarian rose, and she loved him back. So Elizabeth married a prince named Ludwig. Their palace was soon filled with the laughter of children and the blessings of a happy family. Elizabeth loved her children, and she spent time playing with them and nurturing them just as any good mother would. Sometimes, while they played in the garden, a beggar would pass by, and Elizabeth's sweet heart would twist in pain and love for the poor creature. She would run to the palace's kitchen and come out with breads, jams, fruits, and even with the cook's most coveted cabbage rolls. Her loving and good husband did not mind that she gave away food to the poor. Not at all. In truth, it made the man love her even more and cherish her with a love stronger than the one he felt on their wedding day. So she would be with her children outside the palace, and sometimes the poor people would come along begging for food. And so she would run into the palace, take some food, and give it to the poor. Ludwig's mother, however, was not touched by the sweetness and the charity of her daughter-in-law. She was a woman whose heart had forgotten how to breathe fresh air. It had become accustomed to darkness and cold, and the sight of the beautiful roses and their fragrance was irritating its slumber. So naturally, the light that shone from Elizabeth made her mother-in-law a wee bit cranky. The old woman ran to her son, complaining about missing breads or pies at all hours of the day. He listened politely, for he loved his mother, yet he could not help but smile at the love his wife had for the poor. So the mother, Ludwig's mother, does not like that Elizabeth is helping the poor. "Is it time for the miracle of the roses, Grandma?" Little Elizabeth wiggled impatiently closer to her grandmother. Even the cat lifted his sleepy head off the rug. "Be patient. Miracles cannot be rushed. Neither can stories, or they won't taste as sweet as they ought to." Picking up a few stitches on her needle, Grandmother continued. "One cold day," said Grandmother, and she said it was even snowing, and she knew that because her grandmother told her, and she knew that because her grandmother told her, said Elizabeth. Well, if the grandmother said there was snow, then there was snow. So it was a snowy day, and Elizabeth had a basket full of breads and some food. She was making her way to the homes of the poor men, trying to help them fill their children's stomachs and their own. So she's going to houses of the poor people, and she's bringing them food. Well, who would she come upon out in her travels but her own husband and some countrymen? Some even believed her mother-in-law was also there with her. Elizabeth blushed, for did she not want to bring more fights on her dear beloved's head than he already had to deal with? So she didn't want to get in trouble for going to help the poor, because remember, her husband's mother doesn't like that she does this, right? And so it causes fights between them. So she has to kind of do it in secret, but they caught her. He looked lovingly at her, and he asked her in a sweet, devoted, kind voice, "What are you carrying in your basket?" Sweet, sweet Elizabeth, her cheeks as red as the Hungarian roses in her father's garden, she said, now what's really in her basket? Right? Bread and food for the poor. But she said she had roses. My grandmother said Elizabeth's mother-in-law laughed so hard that it made the snow stop falling. Now, roses don't grow in the winter when there's snow. And so the mother-in-law thought Elizabeth, or knew Elizabeth was telling a lie, because she knew that Elizabeth probably had bread in there to feed the poor. In the quietness of the moment, her husband lifted the cloth from the basket, and out did come roses. Red ones, white ones, and they were gently falling to the ground onto the light cover of snow. Elizabeth just stood there in awe of this miracle. How her heart rejoiced at heaven's protection. She looked lovingly at her husband, who was now bent down, picking up the most white, beautiful rose. He kissed it, and he placed it into his wife's hands. So, what did she have in her basket to start out with? She had bread in there, but then she told a lie, and she said that she had roses. And when her husband opened up her coat and looked in her basket, roses really were in there. That's called a miracle. God put the roses in there. I wish I could tell you that they lived happily until old age, but you know I cannot. Ludwig died from a fever and left his wife a young widow. The miracle of the roses did not warm the heart of her mother-in-law or her brother-in-law, and our sweet Hungarian Rose had a hard time in this new land. After she laid her husband to rest, she became a third-order Franciscan, and she continued to live a life of holiness, a life sprinkled with the scent of roses, dedicated to the love and the poor of the sick. So after her husband died, she became a sister, and she helped the poor and the sick. The church bells rang loud and clear, and their sound meant that it was time for the Holy Mass. Quietly, little Elizabeth put on her coat and wrapped her babushka around her long braids. She picked up her roses and quietly slipped outside. Holding on to her grandmother's aging hands, she walked down the small village road. The November air was filled with the smell of hot bread baking and jelly cooking. The village geese followed them curiously and from time to time made a honking noise as if to invite the other passerbys to enjoy the procession. A soft snowflake fell onto Elizabeth's cheeks. She looked up, and the sky was filled with millions of snowflakes falling down to the ground like soft mother's kisses. She clutched tightly to her bundle of roses and snowflakes, just like in the story. If only she had a white rose to add to her bouquet. How happy that would make her to place them at the foot of St. Elizabeth's statue in the village church. When she looked up at Grandmother, Elizabeth saw a white rose resting in her sweet grandmother's wrinkled hand. "Grandmother, how did you know?" she asked. "Well, I had that one pot that never gave any roses, but I waited for it to show me its miracle. And it did, didn't it?" Grandmother answered. "Sure did, Grandmother. What a perfect time for this sweet white rose gift." Elizabeth held tighter to her grandmother, and slowly they made their way inside the church to assist at the holy sacrifice of the Mass and to celebrate the miracle of the woman, Saint Elizabeth of Hungary. And there's just a map. So we're going to find her. She's our very next saint. And we're going to do a little bit of drawing before we do our coloring today. So I'm going to use some blue. And I'm going to make my ground. Now I'm making it blue because blue represents cold. And remember, it was snowing. So draw your ground right by her feet all the way across. Then we're going to take our green and we're going to draw 1, 2, 3, and then 3 on the other side. 1, 2, 3. These are going to be our stems for our roses, and we're going to give them little leaves or thorns. Oh, my nose is so stuffy. Draw some thorns or leaves on your roses. And then I'm going to teach you how to draw a rose. All right? So we're going to do red ones and yellow ones. So we're going to start by doing like kind of a swirly circle. Did you see how I did that? And then I'm just going to make little swirly circles inside. I'm going to make some red and some yellow. And then some kind of like little lines around. Just with our red like this. We're not coloring anything in yet. We're just drawing the outline of our roses. You can make a yellow one. Kind of squiggly. Little lines inside. Then we can use our crayons and we can color them in. Remember, there were red roses and there were yellow roses. And then there were some white roses too. But we're gonna just use red and yellow for our picture. And then remember, it was also snowing. So after you color in your roses, press pause if you need to. And then we're gonna use our blue and we're gonna make little snowflakes. To do a snowflake, you can make a T and then a diagonal line and a diagonal line. Snowflakes. It was snowing. And then we can color Elizabeth. Let's look. Oh, look. If we look at the picture, it looks like she had red and green. So the green was on the outside. I'm going to do some green as her shawl or her robe. And the inside will be red. And her special day is November 17th, which is today. It's called her feast day. When a saint has their special day, it's called a feast day. And then we had some red. Color around her shoes. You can give her shoes whatever kind of color you would like. Let's see. I like to, what color? Maybe purple shoes. That looks pretty. Ooh, that's a dark purple. I'm at my house today doing this video, so I have different kinds of markers. And then I'm gonna make her halo with my marker. I'm gonna make part of her crown with my marker, and then I'll do the rest with my crayon, just so I can tell a difference between my halo and my marker. And then she's got a white like shawl around her hair, and then her hair is kind of poking a little bit out underneath here. There it is. And then we'll make her skin. Roses in the snow. Remember, the miracle happened when she was taking the bread to the poor. She saw her husband and his mother, who didn't like that she helped the poor, and she said, I don't have bread, I have roses. And when she opened up her coat, there were roses in there. And then you can trace her letters for her name. Saint Elizabeth. Elizabeth is my middle name. Elizabeth of, and then the country where she was called Hungary. There we go. Press pause if you need to.